And what we need to realize is that this tool is not just a tool for computation, it's not just a tool for young people, it's mostly a tool for all people to communicate with each other. In fact, it is erroneously called a personal computer. It is neither personal nor a computation machine. It's a group tool for communication. Because the computer is a group tool for communication, it has in recent years started to accumulate new and surprising kinds of uses. What we'll talk about today is those kinds of uses. Two faces that we can start with are, I wonder how many people recognize both faces? On the right hand, Zuckerberg, founder of Facebook. On the left hand, Gutenberg, the inventor of print. And in fact, Gutenberg is famous for making the transition, in fact, dragging all of European civilization from scrolls to printed books, with enormous changes that resulted from that change. Zuckerberg is part of this revolution, dragging us from the book to the computer. It's this transition that social networks are at the forefront of nowadays. This transition from books to computers is favored by some and hated by others, accepted optimistically by some and considered threatening by others. Whether you like this transition from the book to the computer, or whether you don't like the transition, it's going to happen. We need to talk about it whether we like it or not. And we need to realize that this transition is enormous in all possible aspects. It is a transition that has economic implications, educational implications, personal implications, social implications, political implications, and on and on. As this slide says, it is the biggest shift since the Industrial Revolution. The shift from print to computers is going, in fact already is, to put us through an earthquake of enormous magnitudes. And social networks are one of the major components of this big shift. We'll talk about some numbers a little bit later on, but let me jump straight into the notion of social networks hanging on to Hollywood. I wonder how many people here saw the movie Social Network that came out about 2 years ago? Remember, this is the movie poster that publicized that movie. It won some Oscars. It was a popular discussion of what we're going to try to discuss a little bit more seriously tonight. The poster said you don't get to 500 million friends without making a few enemies. That was how they said social networks are interesting, let's pay attention. The movie came out exactly 2 years ago. It was October of 2010. What's wrong with this poster?
Thank you.
We'll talk about the idea in a second, but what's really stands out as wrong. Only 2 years ago, the discussion was 500 million friends. We're already past twice that. 1 billion members of Facebook. Within 2 years, it has doubled. It was important enough 2 years ago to make a movie about it. It is twice as important nowadays. It is a juggernaut. It is growing immensely. In Hebrew, so the poster in English, without making a few enemies, in Hebrew and so forth, already hints not just at the size, but at the controversy. At the fact that this is a controversial technology, the big shift is not that simple. And those of us who are following business are also aware of the fact that there was an IPO only a few months ago. It wasn't as successful as some people hoped it would be. The price of the share has since come back up, since it dipped. It's also a big business question or issue. Social media is something incredibly large, so large that it is even difficult to believe. Here's a picture that I took this afternoon. of a counter, a live counter of what takes place on the internet all the time, 24 hours a day. This is a counter that I let run for 29 seconds, half a minute. Within 29 seconds, or within half of 1 minute, there were already over 1 million likes and comments on Facebook. Within 29 seconds. Within that half second, there were almost 2 million buttons pushed on Google+. There were 100 million emails sent within less than 30 seconds. The social media event is huge. Within that half second, there were 3,400 and some minutes of Skype conversation taking place. There were 49 new members added to LinkedIn. There were 180,000 users logged into Facebook. There were, and on. The numbers are just amazing. It's even more amazing when you see this counter running live. We don't have internet connection here, so I can't show it to you. But if you download the slides, you can go to this address and see the counter on your own. And actually feel it as it goes. So if Facebook were a country, it would be the third most populated country in the world. The only other countries that are larger than Facebook nowadays are India and China, and not for very long. Facebook will catch up and be even bigger than India or China. Another difference is that Facebook's members, most of the people in Facebook, are there by choice, while most of the citizens of India and China are not necessarily there by choice. Facebook witnesses 500 billion minutes spent on it every month. I think it's important for us to stop for a second and ask ourselves, do we realize how much is a billion, or mil millones in Spanish? How much is a billion? If I were to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, when would I get to a billion? If I were just to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, when would I get to a billion? Would it be tomorrow? Next week?
30 years.
It would take 30 years with no sleep. 24 hours a day. 32 years of counting straight through the clock, 24 hours a day. 500 times that is the number of minutes Facebook is watched every month. Facebook is also a place where people send stuff. They upload their pictures, they state their statuses, they send videos. They do that 25 billion, 25 mil millones, 25 mil millones times a month. Facebook is a place where people follow other people 500 billion times a year. Someone watches someone else. Facebook is not the only social media. It's not the only social medium. We'll talk about a spectrum of social media. So for example, YouTube is a very important social medium. Some people don't treat it as a social medium, and we'll try to change this. The several minutes that you've already wasted listening to me, each one of those minutes represents many, many hours of video you will never, ever get to watch. Because by the time you go to watch them, there will be other pieces of video to watch. And that's not to say that videos are not watched. There is an enormous amount of videos that are watched. There are 2 billion videos watched on YouTube every day, most of them generating some comment or connections between people. The numbers are just astounding. There are enormous numbers of pictures uploaded to social media for the purpose of sharing these pictures with other people, and it also percolates into business. 95%, now probably even more, of businesses do their hiring through social networks such as LinkedIn. And maybe the most amazing number, 1 out of every 6 couples married last year in the Western world, that is 15% of all couples married last year, met for the first time on social media. that means bad news for the shadchanim of the world. There's also room to ask what percentage of couples that divorced did so because of social media. But this technology is very present in the most business-oriented part of our life, as well as the most intimate and personal-oriented part of our life. So there's a list of issues or questions we need to ask. Lots of numbers, really impressive. It's happening. By the way, how many people here have a presence on Facebook? Just to get a feeling. How many people here don't have a presence on Facebook?
Don't?
Do not. How many do not have? So we have a pretty much evenly divided audience. And this evenly divided audience is a good venue to raise these questions. Are social media and social networks a passing fad? I promise you to come back to this question when we're done today. Is this just a fashion that, like other fashions, is popular today but will be gone tomorrow? Or is it something that is here to stay? The IPL dump, some indication. Are there problems with privacy that we need to think about? Is there damage caused by online bullying that occurs in schools? Is there damage associated with people being on Facebook instead of being in real social interaction? In other words, does it bring more alienation and more loneliness? Do social networks have a political impact, or are they just some fun pastime? Is there any truth to the slogan of wisdom of crowds, or are we really talking about the stupidity of flocks? I imagine most people here heard the slogan, wisdom of crowds. I imagine many people here question whether crowds are really wise, and can they be wise? Lastly, a theoretical question, one that was asked about Gutenberg and should be asked about Zuckerberg, and that is the technology at fault? Can the technology claim the credit? Or is the technology neutral? What it does is what we choose to do with it. Some people say you shouldn't waste an evening talking about social networks. It's a waste of time. Social networks are like fire. It can be used for good, fire can be used for cooking, or for other constructive purposes, and it could be used for ill, fire can be used for damage. It's not the technology that determines it. And other people say, boy, it really is the technology that determines it. Till we had social networks, we didn't have all of the phenomena we're discussing. So these are all issues we need to make decisions about, or call about them. First realization we need to make is that all of us who are over 25 in this room, there are a couple of people who are not, but those who are over 25 and are still using email, you should realize that email is something for old people. Those under 25 don't use email anymore. It is inefficient, it is slow, it's less accessible, it's yucky stuff for old people. There's a lot of use of email. There's 3 billion emails sent every day, and a lot of use of it in all sorts of arenas. Facebook and Twitter and other social networks are very quickly easing email out. Just watch an 18-year-old or a 15-year-old or a 12-year-old or nowadays a 10-year-old using instant messaging, using other forms of social network-based communication, and you will realize that for them, email is what scrolls are for us. Something we might be nostalgic for, but don't really use. There's a term in Japanese, and I apologize if I mispronounce it, but I think it's pronounced Oyoyo Bisuko. In any case, the pronunciation isn't that important, the meaning is important. In Japanese, the term Oyoyo Bisuko translates to the thumb triad. This notion of an entire generation passing their days away by using their thumbs to communicate. Who would have thought that the thumb would become the major muscle for communication. But you can see it. I mean, this is a picture we're all familiar with. That's how people communicate nowadays, and they communicate through social networks. A variety of social media, a whole field of uses, with an enormous amount of economic and entrepreneurial activity in setting up new ventures, doing a variety of things that networks are supposed to be attractive and promising in delivering. I think the first point I need to drive home is that social networks come in a variety of shapes. There's Facebook. About 2/3 of the people sitting here know about Facebook, and there's no need for me to elaborate. Some of you might know that Facebook operates in competition with other alternatives, such as Twitter and Google+, and it's sort of replaced MySpace, and there's LinkedIn. These are social networks. The point that fewer people realize is that there are hundreds of other very active bodies doing related sorts of functions. In addition to social networks that we discussed, there are also tools for document sharing. Much of our work, in fact, I would be willing to wager half my beard that this is true for everyone in this room. Your work comprises of creating documents. Whether you're a poet or an architect, a teacher or an accountant, a lawyer or a businessman, what you do is create documents. And this notion of work being the creation of information in the form of documents, it could be written text, it could be pictures, it could be drawings, it could be plans, it could be spreadsheets. If your work involves creating documents, it increasingly involves creating documents in a shared mode with other people. And social networks are, by the minute, becoming more and more tools for collaboration, for people to create documents together. That is, not just Facebook and liking someone's status, but a whole host of tools that pull people together and make organizations, make committees, make task forces. Social networks in the service of work and business. Another area in which social networks are thriving is in providing a platform for customer review. It used to be that before we did anything, went on a vacation, or chose a physician for our child, or selected an apartment to rent, or whatever, we would ask our friends. Now, instead, or above and beyond that, we turn to customer review sites. We turn to customer review sites for a review of the hotel we're thinking about staying at, or for a review of the car we're thinking about buying, or for a review of the institution we're thinking about enrolling in. Customer review websites, and there's a whole large set of these, have become social media. If you bought a book on Amazon, you could not avoid the recommendations that Amazon generates for you from people Amazon thinks are like you. It says, people like you. In other words, people who bought books like the books you bought, or people who look for books like the books you were looking for. In other words, some synthetic community of friends that Amazon puts together for you become a social network created ad hoc for you. It's another kind of social network. Another kind of social network is for fundraising. The amount of use of social networks in fundraising for philanthropy and also in fundraising for business is just exploding, and there's a variety of such tools and networks, and they're described here, and you're invited to download the slides and read more detail. There are social networks involved in generating or leveraging the fact that technology now knows where you are. How many people here have a smartphone on them, an iPhone or an Android? All of you are being tracked. All of you are not just able to make a phone call or play a game of solitaire or surf the internet, you're also kept track of. And this fact that some machine somewhere knows where you are can be brought to use by collecting information about other people who might be around you. Location-based social networks are a very fast-growing application of social networks. Social question and answer sites, these are sites where people bring their questions to a community, it could be a professional community, social community, or some other community, and get those questions answered. Since we are in the Jewish Community Center, it's worthwhile mentioning that the notion of She'elot u'Teshuvot, questions and answers, is a notion that has been in Judaism for many, many years. But in Judaism, She'elot u'Teshuvot traditionally have gone to the rabbi. And the literature about She'elot u'Teshuvot was about collecting those questions and collecting the responses coming from the rabbi. Social networks in the service of Q&A are turning that model around, changing it, making it work differently. Social networks are also active in photo sharing, they're active in video sharing, they are active in online gaming. There is an enormous and very crowded field of social networks, so crowded that there are social networks devoted to the integration of social networks. And a whole host of tools that are dedicated to doing this. The details here are too big and too numerous for me to go into, but as I said, the slides are available for anyone who wants to dig in deeper. A few numbers about Facebook in Israel. These are data from 2 years ago, so they are, if anything, just an underestimate. In Israel, 3.5 million people are on Facebook. That is, for every 2 living and breathing Israelis, 1 is on Facebook, including toddlers, including people in old folks' homes, including new immigrants, including people who don't speak the language. More than half of Israelis visit Facebook at least once a day. Most of them visiting Facebook more than once a day. It used to be that you walked into an office and what you would expect to see on the screens of computers was solitary, of course. And that's again, was the most frequent thing on the screen. That's not the case anymore. You walk into an office in Israel and I'll bet you 5 to 1 that what you will see is an open screen of Facebook. That's where people live their lives. But most interestingly is the question of what is a friend on Facebook. On Facebook generally, in the world, of the 1 billion plus people in the world who are on Facebook, they on average have 150 friends each. You don't need to feel bad if you have fewer. You certainly don't need to brag if you have more. The average in the world is 150. The average in Israel is 300. The average in Israel is twice that. It is 300. And that is, in and of itself, that number is a very interesting number to focus on. What does having 150 friends mean? What does having 300 friends mean? What does having twice as many as the average in the world mean for the nature of social life? I'd like to say a few words about social networks in other cultures. Facebook is a very commonly understood term. There was a Hollywood movie made about it. Many people here are active on Facebook. It is a little less widely understood that social networks occur in other cultures and on other platforms a lot, too. For example, there are some Israelis who never heard of Facebook, but spend many hours a day on Odnoklassniki, the most popular social network for Russian speakers in the world. Another one called Contact, also very popular in Israel, of course, in other Russian-speaking regions. In China, there are over 500 different social networks competing with Facebook. Some of them, tiny social networks with only 100 million friends each. There's a social network called QQ in China that has 400 million subscribers. How many people here heard of QQ? 2 people. It's a huge thing. Most of us haven't heard of it. Here's a collection or a map of some of the Chinese social networks. There are social networks in the Arab world as well. In fact, the map of the world in mapping social networks indicates that there are some regions where Facebook is leading and some regions where other networks, for example, Odnoklassniki in Russia, for example, Orkut in Brazil, for example, Maktub in the Arabic-speaking world, and so forth. The point is that as huge as Facebook is, there are many more other networks that are just as important for those indigenous cultures. So here's my Facebook page with timeline and stuff, and a picture of mine, and statuses, and my 3 sons and wife, and so forth. On the Facebook page, there's an enormous amount of information divulged regarding people who own the page. There is information that tells you about what they say, what they thought, what they did, when they did it, where they did it from, how frequently they did it from, so much so that this begins to be a question of privacy. Especially given the fact that social networks generally, and Facebook in particular, have been moving towards creating an easily accessible history of everything that had occurred over time. You can take this history, for example, and very easily generate a map. This is a map of the people I talked with geographically. It can be generated by anyone because the data about who I talked to, who I liked, who I commented on, who liked comments of mine, and so forth, they're all publicly available. And so with the touch of a button, one can generate a picture that says, Shizaf. The person in front of you has a lot of interactions with Western Europe, a lot of interactions with eastern part of the United States, almost none with Brazil, nothing in North Africa. Here's a picture of my set of connections generated at the touch of a button. As I said, Facebook is not the only network. There are a variety of other networks, some of which are rapidly rising and as important to recognize. I'm just curious, are there any people here active on Twitter? 10. About 10 people. On Twitter, like with Facebook, there are some curious numbers to look at. With Facebook, we mentioned the number that counts how many friends you are. With Twitter, you want to count at least three numbers. How many tweets, that is how many messages did a person send? How many followers does the person have, that is how many people outside are listening to that person? And how many follow wing, that is how many people this person is following. So for example, my numbers indicate that I'm not such a nice person. There are many more people following me than I follow them. That ratio is a social ratio. Other people might have many more followers or no followers at all. They may be following many more people or not following at all. Here's at a snapshot 2 numbers that tell you a lot about the social life of a person. With Twitter as well, you can map the activity. That is not just look at the content, but look at the topography of the content. Where do messages go to? Where do they come from? Where does that place a particular person? There's a whole lot of mathematical and automatic analysis that can be done with Twitter. And in fact, in recent months, we've been seeing increasing use of Twitter, for example, for political prognostication, for example, for marketing research, for example, for sociological research, and most interestingly, for the purpose of creating policy. The fact that there are hundreds of millions of tweets generated every day gives us a seismograph, a medical device tuned into the vital signs of humanity, the likes of which we never had before. Here's a prediction. Anyone here involved in public opinion research or market research or following audiences in any way? Those of you who are involved in this, prepare yourselves. The century of using surveys and market analysis and public opinion research is about to end. This idea of surveying people is going to end within a very short period of time. You don't need to survey them anymore. They speak up for themselves. And what they say is available for automatic analysis. There's a whole field, a fascinating field, of new tools called sentiment analysis. You can, at the touch of a button, figure out if the audience in a particular location, or a particular age, or a particular profession, is happy or not happy about something. This is affecting political campaigns, it's affecting manufacturing plans, it's affecting architectural designs, it's affecting any sort of forward thinking, much more than surveys do. Anyone here active on Foursquare? Foursquare is an example, tiny, only 80 million members. So it really is almost negligible when you talk about the numbers of Facebook. It's an example of loyalty producing or following networks. In some countries, Foursquare has made major entries. In some countries, not at all. I don't want to spend too much time talking about it. I just want to mention this is another kind of social network. I wonder if you know about this social network. It happens to be one that was launched in Israel, designed and started in Israel, and it is incredibly successful around the world. It is a free GPS, but from our perspective, it's not the GPS aspect of it, it's the fact that it is a social network-based GPS. It's a system that maps the world through the contributions of all its members. And I've already used Waze on 4 continents. It's better than Google Maps. Because unlike Google Maps, it also tells you when there's a policeman waiting to catch you for speeding. Unlike Google Maps, it allows you to find friends and talk to them. Unlike Google Maps, it also is dynamic. If you follow the fiasco that Apple had with their map product just a couple months ago, you will realize how powerful Waze is and the idea of basing mapping on social networks. So Waze is worth looking at. LinkedIn, of course, is enormously powerful in the workplace. A tool for surveying, a tool for offering jobs, a tool for finding jobs, but most importantly for us Jews, a tool for doing something that we Jews excel in doing. I don't know if the same word works in Spanish, but in Hebrew, a foreign word that is very widely familiar is the word protectia. Say protectia in here as well. LinkedIn is protectia.com. It's a tool that automates the process of, how do you say protectia in Spanish?
Protección.
Influencia.
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 Claro, influencia.
Palanca.
Potencia es influencia.
Palancas.com. Social networks, I'm sorry.
I don't get why you...
Oh, how does it work, or why does it work this way?
Why do you associate LinkedIn with a...
Because LinkedIn goes beyond just being a wanted board. Many people think about it as a place where you can look for a job or offer a job, and that happens. But LinkedIn is a network. It's a network where I can offer a job, and my circle of friends can find out about it. The circle of friends of my circle of friends can find out about it. The circle of friends of the circle of friends of the circle of friends that are my friends can find out about it, and then they can say, wait a minute. But maybe if I don't know Moshe, but I do know Jacob, who is Moshe's friend, I can talk to Jacob and ask them to put in a good word for me. And that is what this social network is designed to do. It's designed to create these connections. As a head of a business school, I'm friends with all our graduates on LinkedIn, and whenever there's a dip in the economy and some of their jobs are threatened or they lose a job, I get a flurry of connections through LinkedIn where people say, I see you are connected to someone with whom I want a connection. Can you make a recommendation or an introduction? So these social networks are used as the modern form of shadchan. We've already said that in the context of romantic relations. Now we can say it in the context of jobs. Palanca.com. So just in terms of numbers, see, this is a snapshot. At some point I had 583 connections on LinkedIn. These are my connections. Since we can count the number of connections of my connections, there are 250,000 people who are one step removed from me. Now this was true before computerizing social networks. Now, on the other hand, these 250,000 people are just one button touch away from me. I can easily automate that sort of connection. social networks can be used for much more specific vertical uses. For example, a social network for drinking together. That is probably not that recommended or not such a good idea. Social networks can be used for good or for ill. Here's an example of a social network that is being pioneered in Israel, and I think is a very good use of social networks, something that might even be of interest to you as a Jewish community in Mexico. And that is the notion of a social community devoted to help people who are sick. This is a network called Kamoni, Like Me, and it is devoted to creating communities of people who share an illness. Communities of diabetics, communities of people who suffer from heart disease, communities of people who have back problems, communities of people who are fighting dietary problems and so forth. It turns out that these communities have a lot to say to each other. They can offer a lot of support. And if you make this online available, you get what we got in Israel. I'm involved in this network. My research center is involved in developing it. What you get is communities of people with like sorts of concerns, offering not just a shoulder to cry on, but actually useful advice. In a world where a minute or 10 minutes of the physician is very expensive, this could be some paramedical addition that is worth a lot. This particular system was set up by the 3 larger hospitals in Israel and the health maintenance organizations, the Bot Cholim, and it's very active. The idea of social networks, therefore, can apply to things like drinking, but it can also apply to things like health service provision. And it might be interesting to other communities to explore this. So we need to ask about how to plan for this technology that is growing by the minute. Only 2 years ago, it was really important, and there were 500 million. 2 years later, there are now 1 billion, and there's nothing to stop it from becoming 2 billion or 3 billion, or pretty much everywhere. Can we plan for the future with this technology? Do we understand where it's going? And I'd like to propose that we don't. I'd like to suggest that we are really feeling our way in the darkness, and we are not that well informed in thinking about social networks. And here's my proof. 20 years ago, this cartoon was published. It's a cartoon that came out when the internet first became available for civilian use. And it's a picture of 2 dogs. The veteran dog is sitting on a chair, and the veteran dog is lecturing the newcomer dog that's on the floor. The newcomer dog is told, look at this new thing, the internet is wonderful. On the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. It was a popular cartoon in 1993 when the internet became first available. Everybody liked it, and only now do we realize how, maybe it was funny, but how wrong this cartoon was. Because on the internet, not only does everybody know that you're a dog, they know exactly where every tick is located. It is exactly the reverse of an anonymous location. So we need to update this cartoon, and if we update this cartoon, we'll need to update the computer as well. And instead of an old large monitor, put something more modern. Let's also update the dogs, put in some younger dogs, and have a new cartoon with younger dogs and a laptop and a new message. And the message now says, the veteran dog tells the young dog, on the internet I have so many friends, an average 300 friends in Israel. On the internet, there are thousands of other people who know my preferences. It's an entirely different experience. It's not that on the internet nobody knows I'm a dog. It's on the internet everybody knows I'm a dog and knows exactly what I liked and which groups I'm a member of and what I commented, and can trace it all the way back to when I first connected to Facebook. And to understand social networks, we will probably need to update the cartoon even one more time. And let's replace the dogs with cats, and let's uncover the real meaning of internet and social networks. And the real meaning of internet and social networks is still a veteran cat talking to the newcomer to cat, but this time indicating that it is all about business. It's all about being there for some individual advantage. And I want to remind you, I'm showing you these 3 cartoons to highlight the question, do we understand the technology today so as to make plans for the future? Are we in a position to carry out policy decisions if we don't understand technology of 10 years in the future like we didn't understand technology 20 years in the past? Asking the questions again, are we causing damage? What are the problem points? What are the policy issues we need to raise? There are some basic terms that we need to understand for us to analyze social networks in depth. We need to understand whether networks are a choice or an imperative. Those of you who have teenage children, ask them whether they have a choice to be on Facebook, or is it dictated? You cannot be a teenager without being on Facebook. We need to understand the question of whether social networks are something we push into or are pulled into. We need to understand some notions called PageRank and EdgeRank that I'll get to in a second. We need to investigate, and this is the sort of things we do in my research center, all of us who study the internet. We need to understand the basic tools of social networks beyond the marketing hype. For example, are the links we have on social networks, are they bridging links or are they bonding links? Are they weak links or are they strong links? Is the structure of the network random or is there some order in the structure? We can carry on for an entire semester discussing all of these terms. What I want to impress on you is that beyond the innocent view of networks, there is some hard science emerging. Some hard science that is useful in business, that is really required in education, that is essential for politics, that is going to redesign our lives. When I said that there's an enormous shift akin only to the Industrial Revolution, what I mean is all of these things that are visiting us nowadays. So one point I want to make is that with social networks arriving on our doorstep, one fact we used to agree on has just gone out the window. We used to agree on saying that business has only 3 rules. Any businessmen in the room? Businesswomen? What are the 3 rules of business? Location, and location. All 3 rules are wrong. They're no longer true. The 3 new rules of business because of social networks are reputation, reputation, and reputation. It would never have occurred to any of us to go and buy our books in Seattle, Washington. Why should I go to Seattle, Washington? In the age when anything that mattered was location, 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 I would go to a bookstore that I could go to. But in the age that reputation matters, we all know Amazon. And we go to Seattle. The tools of social networks now represent the fact that location is less important by the minute, and reputation is more important by the minute. There's a whole science and a lot of technology involved in measuring reputation, in trying to affect reputation. In fact, much of what social networks are about is about running reputation. Another point that is worthwhile learning, I think one of the more interesting, popularly speaking, notions of social networks is something called Dunbar's number. Dunbar is a British anthropologist who tried to answer this question. How many friends do you have? Think in terms of how many people would you invite to your child's wedding? Or how many people would you expect would show up for your funeral and you would really be upset if they don't? How many people do you consider or count among your friends? How many friends should you have? Now for your own perspective or for your children's perspective? And how many friends can you have? Let me tell you that when I took my first glance at my middle son's Facebook page, and I saw that he has a meager 3,500 friends, I was astounded. In fact, I scolded him. I said it could not possibly be that you have 3,500 friends. It doesn't work. And I got interested in these questions. How many friends do you have? How many friends should you have? How many friends can you have? How many friends do people on average have? Well, I already told you that on average on Facebook, people have in the world about 150 friends. Dunbar applied this question to all species. Here's a picture of some birds in a flock that have friends. Dunbar found that people have, on average, 150 friends. That this is the natural number. In fact, it's natural. He has this interesting graph where he says it's a direct function of the brain size. The smaller the brain size, the smaller the number of friends a species have on average. So, for example, monkeys, our close cousins, have an average circle of 15 friends. Friendship in the monkey world is expressed mostly by grooming, pulling out lice. And you can only groom so many monkeys who are your friends. Friendship in our world is expressed mostly through not grooming, most of us don't groom. Friendship in our world is expressed mostly through gossip, through talk. In fact, Dunbar has a wonderful book called Grooming, Gossip, and the Evolution of Communication, where before the internet he predicted that humans will have a ceiling of about 150. It's interesting to see these circles that Dunbar draws for the number of friends we have as a function of the communication technology that we have at our disposal. Since we are able to gossip, we can talk. We can have more friends than the chimpanzee, who doesn't know how to talk. And I'm telling you this story because since we have social networks, my prediction is we're going to be able to have larger circles. Because social networks make communication more efficient in the same way that gossip improved on grooming. A point to think about. People are beginning to create these interpersonal relationship charts. Who am I a friend of? Who in my circle of acquaintances am I in what kind of a relationship? Do I like? Do I hate? Do I comment on their pages? Do I ignore them? Social networks are technology that automates this, takes it beyond just writing and makes it into something that can be done better. In fact, there's a lot of thinking being put into how to do this better. So Google has been for the last 2 years trying to generate interest in their social network called Google Plus that has a different structure than Facebook. Twitter has a different structure than either Google Plus or Facebook. Twitter, for example, is non-symmetrical. You don't need to be someone's friend for there to be your friend. While on Facebook, it requires symmetry. An interesting distinction. One that we want to think about in terms of where do we want to place our friends. There's, as I said, a growing science of building networks. So for example, an example that might be familiar to you, this is what the highway system in the US looks like. This is what airline connections look like. They're not the same. There's a difference in the structure or the topology of networks, and there's a whole science of how to build such networks so that they are appropriate for the tasks we want to set for them. I'm not going to bore you with the science tonight, it's a little too late. I just want to impress you with the fact that this is as interesting as some other young sciences. It's actually a whole field where you can look at preferential attachment, you can look at personal relations, you can look at prominence and reputation, you can look at the epidemiology of real sicknesses.